So let's finish up by looking at the Aztecs. So we talked about the Olmecs, we talked about the Mayans. Now I'm going to conclude by focusing on the Aztecs. So this is pre-Columbian, before the Europeans come to the United States or to the Americas, and looking at how the Aztecs became the dominant group in Mesoamerica, particularly in central Mexico. So the Aztecs kind of aligned their history to the people that were already in central Mexico. So the Aztecs were actually latecomers. There were already a few tribes in central Mexico, and the Aztecs come and they need to kind of build a relationship with local community and even lineage. So they kind of connect their history to the Toltecs. So before I get to the Aztecs, let me briefly mention the Toltecs because this ties into Aztec history. So for the Toltecs, there's a ruler. His name is Quetzalcoatl, and that name will be very important, who rules in the region of Tula. And he is forced to leave because of this one incident that happens where he got drunk and had, this relationship with a relative. I think it might have been his daughter, I can't remember. But nevertheless, he's told to leave and he's kicked out of the community. And he tells them, well, I'm going to come back and take what's rightfully mine in the year of Seacatl. So this year is very important because this is the year the Spanish arrived to the Americas, which is 1519. So this year becomes very central to when Cortez in particular lands in the Americas, not so much Columbus. So again, these are not the Aztecs, these are the Toltecs, but the Aztecs kind of tie their history into their history, because if you've heard the folklore is that Quetzalcoatl comes from the east. Supposedly he was supposed to be all white and be bearded and so forth. And lo and behold, somebody shows up in 1519 that is white and bearded, and the Aztecs believe that it was this god, Quetzalcoatl. So let's focus on the Aztecs now. So the Aztecs come to Mesoamerica from a place called Aztlan. This is another important idea that is connected to both indigenous history but also Mexican-American history. Because Aztlan is supposedly located in what is today the American Southwest. So Chicanos make this connection with a homeland. Every group needs a homeland, right? Every person has one, right? If you're Italian, you have Rome. If you're Jewish, you have, Israel. So every civilization has a homeland. And for many Chicanos who feel like we have been orphaned to some extent, right? We feel like Aztlan is our homeland, therefore making the Southwest our home, kind of tying that history. Now, this all comes out of the 1960s, but it is based on some of these stories that tie back to the Aztec people. So in 1111, the god, this is part of a myth, the god here supposedly tells the Aztecs, who are kind of wandering in the Southwest, he tells them to go south, and he supposedly is their main deity, and he tells them that they're already like in the place of paradise, the places of the 7 caves, but if they go south, they're going to find something better. And how do they know when they'll arrive? Well, they'll know when they see an eagle perched on a cactus. So they move south, and they land in the region which is the central Mexico, which today is Mexico City. So they kind of create this connection between their history and the people that were already in central Mexico. Why? Because as I mentioned earlier, Aztecs are latecomers, and in order to build kind of a positive reputation, is that you need to link up with groups that are already there in different ways, either through marriage or politically or even militaristic. Now, they arrived in this place called Chapultepec, and the Aztecs are a very they're a tribe that nobody likes, basically because they're too militaristic. their god, Huitzilopochtli, which is the god of war, kind of ties into their philosophy of being good warriors. So there's this funny story, I won't show you the video, but there's this funny story where the Aztecs try to kind of marry their way into the local community. So this guy, Coxcox, kind of gives them land in return for an alliance, because again, the Aztecs are great military warriors. So it kind of pays off for them, because in doing so, they begin to build alliances, they begin to gain territory, and they kind of grow from there. But after a while, they obviously, like any other group, right, they want more. So Coxcox tries to get rid of them by kind of marrying them off. Actually, he doesn't try to get rid of them right away. He actually tries to subdue them by having his daughter marry into the Aztec nobility. So what happens is that they sorry, it's kind of funny. Coxcox gives his daughter to the Aztecs, and the Aztecs invite him, along with other people, to come to the ceremony. And when he shows up, what he finds is that the Aztecs have killed his daughter, and they skinned her, basically, and they're dancing around in this fire wearing her skin. And this obviously makes Coxcox very angry, because this is his daughter, and he tries to, sends in the military to get rid of the Aztecs. So the Aztecs are actually pushed out of the territory that they gain, and they are forced into this island. So here you see, these codices with the eagle and the cactus, right? And they're forced into this island in Mexico. Mexico City used to be a lake, and the Aztecs build basically an island on this lake. They're left to kind of just die off in this island, very swampy, a lot of snakes and things like that, and they actually live off this stuff, and they survive. Again, if you want to learn more about this stuff, you take Mexican history or maybe anthropology class. But this kind of shows the resilience of the Aztecs to come from nothing and become the major power of Mesoamerica. So Montezuma I is this emperor who grows the territory and creates it into the empire that we kind of recognize. Now, the empire itself is not like, say, like the Roman Empire, but more, it's a loose conglomerate of many different tribes. So basically, everybody just more or less pays tribute to the Aztecs. So in the map, it would look like they controlled the majority of Mexico. In reality, they do control it, but for the most part, they don't own it. It's just people paying them tribute to keep them away. However, even within their region, there are certain tribes that they never conquer, particularly this group, the Tlaxcalans. And this would become a thorn on their side, particularly when the Spanish move in. They're always going to war. Again, this is a very militaristic society. Wars are good. They participate in what are called the flowery wars. And with some of the other tribes, they go to war continuously. And, they capture people, they use them for sacrifice. But these wars really kind of build a wedge between the local tribes that are within Mesoamerica. Now, Tenochtitlan, the city itself, is a very magical place, if you will. It's actually quite massive when you compare it to other cities of the time. A lot of times, if you ever watch the History Channel, which has gone to crap, because all they ever talk is about aliens and how aliens came down and built these civilizations. Well, a lot of that's very problematic because it kind of discredits the kind of genius of these people. As we talk with the Mayans, they were doing some great mathematical concepts. They were doing surgeries, right? They were doing all these great things, and these kind of modern conspiracy theorists kind of develop these ideas. Well, it must have been aliens because these people can't obviously develop these things. Well, they'll be further from the truth, because when we look at a city like Tenochtitlan, it is a bit of a wonder how, how great this city is. Particularly when the Spanish arrived, they are in complete awe of the city. You'll see that next week or next couple of weeks when we look at the relationship between the Aztecs and the Spanish. The city, now numbers vary, this is a low estimate, but the city is built on a lake, and the Aztecs actually build the lake, so they kind of extend territory, kind of moving out. And it houses about 200,000 people. Now note that around this time, we're talking about 1400s, 1500s, the biggest population in Europe is probably London, which houses about 80,000 people. So this easily doubles, if not quadruples, triples the amount of people in a city. And it's a city, as you can kind of see here, it's outlined like Phoenix. If you ever go to Phoenix, it's almost virtually impossible to get lost in Phoenix because everything's built on the grid system, at least in the major avenues that we have. Well, Tenochtitlan is built in the same way. You can see how they systematically built a city to be conducive towards business. So it has these kind of great marketplaces. Some of these marketplaces actually still exist. For example, the flower market dates back to the Aztec era. So the flower market today, that's still very active in Mexico, can trace its roots back to this period. So they're engaging in many different industries, everything from chocolate beans, right, to material, to a bunch of other different goods. And this, the city itself, again, comparing it to Europe, it's probably, I would say about 10 times cleaner than your European cities. Sorry for that noise, it's an airplane. They have these beautiful canals that boats can enter into the city and transport goods. The streets have gardens. They actually have flowers throughout the community, so the city smells beautiful. They have zoos. They actually have drawbridges. And this is very important. They have a drainage system where the Europeans were throwing things, throwing their poop out the window. The Aztecs were actually had a drainage system to carry waste out of the city. Garbage pickup. Again, Europeans were just throwing things out their doors, which is why you have so many diseases in places like Paris and London and Rome and so forth, right? These cities were kept clean, and the people themselves were actually clean. Again, Europeans, if they're lucky, they would bathe once a month. So the city is a bit of a wonder. When Cortes arrives, he is definitely dumbfounded, that he found the city. Kind of like, imagine yourself going to Oz, if you ever watched The Wizard of Oz, right? I mean, you probably could never believe that this existed outside your world. So yeah, I mean, the people themselves are actually clean too, and as we all know, and you'll see this in a few weeks, is that Europeans bring a lot of diseases because they're just disgusting people, right? They had just gone through a Black Death, kind of like what we're going through today in 2020 with the coronavirus. Well, Europe had gone through this for 3 years in 1347, whereas in the Americas they were fairly clean, so they didn't have such bad outbreaks like they did in Europe. Now, Aztec Society is a very kind of class. By no means are we saying that they're utopian. It's a class system. Certain people on top, certain people at the bottom. They at the top of this hierarchy, you have a royal family with one legitimate wife, but had many other partners with many kids. It is noted that Montezuma II had about 1,000 partners, and out of those 1,000 women, 150 of them were pregnant at the same time, right? So definitely kept busy there. And when it comes to ruling, unlike Europe where the firstborn gets to rule, In Mesoamerica, it's really the most competent one that gets to rule, which makes much more logical sense, right? You don't want a stupid person ruling your country just because they happen to be born first. A great example of that is Louis the 16th. Poor guy was incompetent, and hence the French Revolution. In Mesoamerica, which is a much more logical system, is let's have the best person that's capable of rule the territory. Below them, you have the warrior class. Makes sense, right? It's a very militaristic society, so the warriors are very important. There's a way to move up. These are the kind of major status of the important warriors. Either you're an eagle or jaguar. And in order to reach that status, you had to commit a certain amount of deeds to reach that status. Below them is another very important group. It's called the Pochteka, and they are basically business people. And they're important because as business people, they're trading goods throughout the empire, traveling in different sectors of the empire, and they're collecting information. So as they're going about their business, their economic business, they also get information, and in doing so, they get that information and bring it back to the royal family to share what's happening in these far off parts of the empire. Below them, you have basically everybody else, right? This would be people like you and me who would probably just work. It's somewhat of a feudal system if you understand European history. Basically you work to survive. There's no wage salaries at this time, and this would consume the majority of the population. Most of these people did not own land, and they just basically worked for a living. And then the last group, they were monogamous, unlike the kings, right, who had many mistresses, and everybody seemed to be cool with that. These people were not, right? So they practiced monogamy, and probably just like today. The last group are the slaves. The slaves themselves were at the bottom of society, but slavery is very different from slavery today. They had no concept of what we call today chattel slavery. Their concept of slavery was maybe something like maybe the Roman idea, not like the American model, where you're born into it. A lot of times people sold themselves into slavery either because they could not feed themselves or whatever, but a lot of times they just had debt to pay, so they became slaves. And there's really, you can get out of this system too. So you didn't have to be a slave your entire life. You can actually buy your way out, or serve your time and then be part of society. Your kids do not become slave also. So it's very different from, say, what happens in the American South. In the American South, right, which is a horrible system that becomes institutionalized in the U.S. So this is very very much so different from the American model. So people can actually work their way out of this. I'm going to stop it there. I'm going to have you do a quick assignments regarding the reading, and I'll finish this up after that.